Welcome to She Inspires Me. I'm your host, Caroline Brunne, founder of She Inspires Me and Organise Curate Design. Launched as a Facebook passion project back in 2017, She Inspires Me was reborn as a podcast in 2020 to highlight the incredible women we all encounter in our everyday lives. Thanks to our key sponsor, Organise Curate Design, I welcome you to Season 2, another year of sharing the stories of inspirational women. Well, here we are. We are officially at episode 20 of season 2 of She Inspires Me. Before we get stuck into today's episode, I just wanted to jump in your ears and just say thank you. There are some of you out there who I know listen to every single episode, every single Wednesday. And considering that we have released 40 episodes since we launched this podcast in 2020, maybe I just don't have enough words anymore. Maybe I've used them all throughout all of these episodes, but the first word that comes to mind for me is that I am incredibly grateful for you, for your time, for your ears, for your thoughts. I have some of you who reach out to me and let me know, what insights that you've gained from, different episodes, how you have implemented things that you've learnt from some of our guests to make some real changes in your life, and just how certain things have made you laugh or cry or have really moved you in different ways. And that is the power of storytelling. That is the power of these incredible women who I have the pleasure of meeting with and speaking with and sharing their stories with you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I do have a request. If you haven't subscribed yet and you somehow still manage to listen to our episodes, please subscribe using your podcast app, be it Apple or Spotify. That's probably the main two that most of you use. If you could leave us a review, that would be incredible, because it really helps us identify what's working well, and it also, from a podcasting perspective, helps other people find out about the podcast and the episodes. So if you could do that for me, that would be just so good. And lastly, there are some people in your world who may really appreciate the podcast as a whole, each and every episode, and there are some that may appreciate specific episodes. So if you can think of something that you've heard or an interview that I've done, or the podcast, as I said, as a whole, use the share feature on your podcast app and send it to someone via a text or a WhatsApp or whatever else. I would really love to get these women into more people's ears, and I think the easiest way of doing that is to just share the love. So once again, thank you. Today is episode 20, which means we are wrapping up season 2 of She Inspires Me. I'm about to take a mini break from this particular podcast, as I have already started working on a completely different podcast that we are launching under the banner of Organise Curate Design. If you are curious to see what we're up to, keep an eye on the Organise Curate Design social media handles. We will be able to share more with you in the coming weeks and months as we continue to work on that project. Now, enjoy today's episode. I hope that you gain some insights from it, just as you have probably in our previous episodes. Thank you again for being such a dedicated listener. And I will speak to you again soon on the next season of She Inspires Me. Hi, everyone. As you would have heard in the audio that you just heard, today is the last episode of She Inspires Me for season 2. I'm not surprised that just due to the way that the schedule has played out, that episode 1 of She Inspires Me season 2 was with the founder of Bravehearts, where we talked about childhood sexual abuse. And by chance, today's episode is touching on similar topics. So I am here in your ears just one more time before we share my interview with Christine to give you a trigger warning and make sure that you are, one, only with adults when you listen to today's episode. There is some really sensitive content and topics that are not suitable for young children. I encourage you to make sure that you are in a space where you are comfortable listening to some really distressing and confronting information. We touched today on childhood sexual abuse, human trafficking, and prostitution. So these are not easy topics to listen to, and they often shatter our sense of reality, our sense of humanity, our sense of all of the things that happen in the world that we would quite happily ignore, but know that they exist. Christine does a brilliant job whilst sharing her story and the story of the work that she does to bring a real light and shade to this interview. We do have some laughs. It is not all doom and gloom, but before you start listening, please just be mindful of the content we will be discussing. If you do find today's episode difficult and you need some mental health support, I have made sure that we've put the details for Lifeline in our show notes where you can seek some support. And of course, you're welcome to always reach out to us, be it myself through the 𝗦𝗵𝗲 social media accounts, or with Christine, who obviously has a lot of experience in this space and can point you in the right direction. This is a brilliant episode. It is one that I'm really proud of, and I am really grateful to be sharing Christine's story as we wrap up season 2. Enjoy, be kind to yourself, go with love, and I will speak to you all soon. Welcome to another episode of She Inspires Me. Today we are jumping into episode 20 of season 2, which is formally the last episode of our season. I am incredibly grateful for my guest today who's joining me, because we are both in a snap lockdown. So welcome, Christine Teo.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for having me.
Now we have been juggling life. I think we've both rescheduled this podcast episode. I don't even know how many times. I think I've lost count. We've both had to reschedule. But that's just life. And I think, we've got a lot to chat about today, but we like to keep it pretty real. And we're releasing this episode really, sometimes I record and we release like a lot later, but we're recording the Saturday before the Wednesday of release. So it's well and truly in the time that we release this, we will still be in our lockdown and our snap lockdown here in Victoria. And it's totally cool. I think it's just a part of life. Now, you have such an incredible, interesting background and story. So I'm going to share with our listeners a little bit about you now, and then we'll get stuck into just all of the questions I have for you. So Christine Teo, sounds good. So Christine Teo is a senior government advisor, a social worker, an entrepreneur, human rights advocate, policy writer, educator, visionary, and public speaker. Christine is currently a senior advisor at the Mental Health Division in the Department of Health. She is also the founder of Cakes That Care and Generation 414, a social enterprise that provides dignified employment to survivors of human trafficking through the sale of their handmade products. This business concept for Generation 414 was birthed out of a tour through Southeast Asia. One summer break, Christine was brutally confronted with the way that local women were callously treated by male tourists. At night, streets were lined with school-aged girls selling their bodies for cash. Christine was often approached by male tourists and mistaken to be a prostitute during her visit because of her Asian descent. This infuriated her, and it was this anguish that led her to create Generation 414 to address the issues of sexual exploitation. Christine has international experience in combating sexual exploitation and human trafficking. Christine's work and research in this area has brought her across the United States, Europe, and Asia. She is actively involved in many community outreach programs and development programs, and provides private consultancy to numerous community development alliances globally, including the likes of Mrs. Martin Luther King III, and actively involved in roundtable discussions with UN agencies and government agencies on addressing the issue of trafficking through public policy and legislation. During her stint in the USA, she was invited to apply to work with Senator Bob Corker on the End of Modern Slavery Initiative Act of 2015, S.553, which was passed in April 2015. She was involved in legislative work in a legislative working group that presented recommendations to President Jimmy Carter at the World Summit End Sexual Exploitation 2025. Christine provides consultancy services to several anti-human trafficking organisations on how to be more efficient and effective in their operations using the logical framework approach. Her posting in Asia as the development manager of the A21 campaign, she acquired extensive networks and partnerships across the Greater Mekong Delta sub-region with relevant government and UN agencies, embassies, law enforcement, community coalitions, faith-based organisations, and other key stakeholders in developing programs to address the issue of human trafficking. She also ensured that her team provide holistic support survivors of human trafficking through personalised victim-centred support services and trauma-informed care. Christine is currently helping to roll out the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system and the health initiatives due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When Christine is not working, she is baking cupcakes to fundraise for various causes and organisations and community events. Christine often guest lectures in Victorian universities to social work students to inspire them to be the change they wish to see in the world. She's also a board member and one of the key anti-trafficking organisations here in Victoria, Project Respect. Christine, I firstly just want to thank you for the work that you've done and continue to do. I think some of us live in a world where we may live in a really nice bubble where we don't actually know that some of the things that I've even just mentioned and the work that you've done exist. It's nice living in a bubble. In some ways it's real because what you believe and what you see and what you experience is your reality. But we know that it is far beyond, like the things that happen in the world are far beyond what some of us can even imagine. And it's like we were chatting just before we started recording, like today is a normal day for us. We've thought about the kids and groceries and we're in a lockdown and we're doing life, but it isn't necessarily the case for other people. So with this incredibly extensive career as a change maker, has standing up and speaking out always been something that you have done? Like, are you that kid that was like, no, that's not right and I need to do more things? Or has there been like a pivotal moment for you that's headed you in this direction?
Yeah, and it was interesting for you to say that, Caroline, and I was reflecting on my life too, growing up, because I grew up in Singapore, and being, from an Asian descent, there is still that gender inequality where most Chinese parents still prefer to have sons to carry on the family name instead of daughters, and daughters they say, girls should be seen and not heard. So I grew up in that kind of culture. where I was, my role was to be in the kitchen. I should not be too educated because I'll get married and have children someday anyway.
Yeah.
And that if you have something to say, we're not interested in hearing because you're a girl,
Yep.
pretty much.
Yep.
So I grew up in that culture, but I was really thankful that I went to a convent school. So I had a convent education. And compared to a public school, their culture was very different, being in an all-girls school. And the nuns in the school would just inspire you and tell you you can do whatever, you can. If you can dream it, you can do it. And that gender shouldn't prevent you from achieving whatever you want in life. And so even though I lived in a family culture that was quite different, I chose to believe what my school was teaching me. And really, in being in that school, it had a really strong sense of social justice. We're known for that back in Asia, the convent schools. And so it was just part of the growing up, the education that was instilled in us. Our motto was simple: in virtue, steadfast in duty. And what are virtues? Virtues are standing up for injustice, speaking out for wrongdoings, helping one another, being caring, being, considerate towards your neighbors and things like that. So I think those virtues were deeply instilled in me throughout my education back in Singapore.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an incredible contrast of environments. Having, your home life where I'm sure in some ways it was spoken, like it was said what the expectations were, but I'm sure that there were a lot of non-verbal cues and environmental situations where you knew that being a woman or a girl meant that you were expected to act and be in a certain way, but to be going to school and then be told almost the opposite, and really given the platform and the space to really flourish and thrive. Wow, what an incredible, as I said, contrast, but also great opportunity to start expanding your thought process and living through those virtues.
Yeah.
Now,
I think, sorry.
No, go. Tell us.
And I think, to all the Asian listeners out there, you would, in a sense, if you're a female listener, you would kind of understand what I'm talking about. And I remember, when I finished year 12 and my parents were like, why should we continue to spend money on you? You're going to get married someday. And so I was in that position. Do I continue education? Because they weren't going to fund it. But somehow I remember there was a session, one of those career sessions that you have in school before graduation. And they were saying that an education is something that nobody can ever take away from you. And an education is the passport to the life that you want to lead. And so I had the choice at year 12 whether I stop education and just go get a job as a checkout chick or an admin data entry clerk, or I can find ways to work as the data entry clerk and then fund my education. And I pushed really hard to get a degree. And then I think I overcompensated with 3 masters.
Just to prove your point, I can do this and I'm going to do it 3 times over and then a little bit more.
Yes, and crazy enough to start a doctorate next year.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. And I guess I'm curious then, how does that impact, or I don't know if you're still in contact with your family. I don't know if your parents are still alive. I don't know much about you personally.
Yeah.
But what does that look like for them or for your family members who have watched you thrive, watched you really excel in your education and your career? And what's that experience like?
It's been a challenging relationship with the parents because I'm considered the black sheep of the family because I do not do what as told.
Yeah, that's boring doing what you're told.
Yeah, so in fact, it's like sometimes I think they prefer not to tell me anything because I will go and do the opposite.
So they have to kind of like reverse psychology. So they have to say, it would be great for you to go and get another master's or a doctorate. And then you're like, oh, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do the opposite. So they managed to try and trick you. But I think you'd see straight through that.
Yeah. So it was like, oh, so when are you going to get your PhD? There was one time it's like, oh, soon enough.
I love that answer.
It's quite funny. I think the parents are challenging, but what I've managed to, and because I come from quite a large extended family with cousins and many nephews and nieces, and I feel really privileged that I got the opportunity to inspire and be a role model for the younger cousins and now the nephews and nieces, that they can achieve whatever they put their hearts to. Some of them a little bit more familiar with my history and my family upbringing, and they can see like if we can rise, or I could rise above that. I remember I was at a conference with some of my nephews and nieces, and I never knew, but they told me when they were growing up, their parents, which were my cousins, used to always tell them off when they didn't do well in school and say, if Auntie Christine, in spite of what she was going through, could excel in school, you've got to put in a little bit more effort, girl.
That's so great though. Like that's a double-edged sword, because you want to look up to Auntie Christine, but then you're like, oh, Auntie Christine, stop succeeding. You're making us look bad.
Yeah, so sometimes they have really honest conversations with me about that. But I guess they always tell me that every time they feel challenged in life or they're going through a really difficult period or season, they look at me and they go, look, if she can do it, so can I. Or that they know that I'm always just a WhatsApp message or just a call away, and they could always speak to me. And I think I've got, enough stored bags of encouragement to try and just hold their hand and help them across that difficult season. So I feel very privileged that I can do that for my family.
Oh, wow. That is absolutely incredible. And that's a really big part of, the work that a lot of us do. It's about the next generation and giving them those opportunities and modeling the behavior that we may not have seen, but that is incredibly important to us. Now, we personally connected through the work that you do through Generation 414. We connected through social media. I actually don't even know how we connected. I don't know the specific day or time of how we connected, but this has brought us to this conversation today.
Yeah, I tried trolling back Facebook and I couldn't.
Yeah, I couldn't work it out either. I was like, one day I didn't know you and the next day I did, and I'm grateful for that. So whatever the reason, it has been
the universe
wonderful.
had, it was meant to be.
Exactly, very much so. Now, I spoke a little bit about Generation 414 when I was sharing your bio and your experience with our listeners. But can you talk us through what happened when you were in Southeast Asia, and what has driven you to start those two organizations that you run?
And like you mentioned earlier, our world is what we see and what we experienced. And so, unless you've been exposed to something else, you really don't know any different. And I guess growing up in Asia for a long period of time, for at least 20 odd years, I was in, even though life was difficult, but I was still in my little Singapore bubble. But it was only when I went down to Thailand and, I was traveling with a Caucasian friend, and they would ask, how much he paid for me, or come to me and ask me, or how much do I charge for, providing services to him. It was just awful. It's like, I've got an education, I've got a good career, and, you can't, and you treat me like, I felt really crappy about myself. But that also opened up my eyes, and I saw how tourists were treating other fellow Asians, which I would say in a sense are my sisters. And I go, humanity, there is equality in humanity, or there should be love and there should be respect. And to see how these really young ladies were treated by foreign tourists was just unbearable for me. And I'll share, one of the experiences. I was just walking, and I think she was maybe 14, 15, with too little clothes and too much makeup.
Yeah.
And then one of the men, it was about 2 or 3 in the morning. We had a late night out, and we were just walking back to our hotel. And then there was this drunken man that just was approaching this girl that caught my eye, and he went and grabbed her and went, how much? And then just dragged her. She didn't even have a chance to respond with a price, and he just dragged her off. And I could, this cannot be. And I was just thinking, this is just one night and one person, but it was just all around me. And so I went back to the room that night and thinking, I cannot go back to Singapore after this holiday and pretend I never saw that, or that I did not have an emotional response to that experience. And I cannot not do anything about it. I just had to do something. And so at the start, I didn't know what to do. Then I just Googled and saw what other organizations were available, helping the cause. And because I've got a hobby of baking cupcakes. So I started baking cupcakes and just doing fundraising. And that was how Cakes That Care started up. With just baking cupcakes, fundraising, and then just donating the money to 𝗦𝗵𝗲, which was the anti-trafficking organization, which I ended up being headhunted to go and set up Asia operations for. And then after that, people started to want to, they have birthdays, they have weddings, or they would have parties, and they would want to give me money or pay me money to pay for them. I go, all right. And if you're happy to give me money, I'm happy to take it.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. You touched on something there that's actually a really interesting part of the human experience. We can all choose to see what's right in front of us. It actually takes a certain strength to be open to actually opening your eyes and seeing what's around you. So I mentioned before that bubble. I even think about just walking through the streets of the city, maybe on a cold evening, and if you look properly, you can see the homeless people. You can see the people that, don't have a safe place to live. You can see them, and for everyone you see, there are many more behind the scenes that are not maybe in that specific spot.
Yeah.
But you can choose not to see. You can choose to look straight ahead. You can choose to continue to do life in your bubble. And then there's the second part. There's that moment in time where you go home and you go back to the safety of your own space, or in your case, a hotel, and you can then choose. You then have to choose if you park that information somewhere in your psyche and you block it up and go, oh, I saw that, but I don't have to do anything. Or you can do something. And I understand that for our listeners out there, don't get me wrong, I understand that we will see things every single day that we can't necessarily make. We can't change everything in the world. There's a lot going on in the world, but there are many ways that you can make change. And the things that really impact you are the things that are your calling. They're the things that are driving your purpose and the calling of why you're here. And it may be buying Christine's cupcakes, and that may be the thing that you do to contribute. It may be something else that you've seen that you want to change, and that's really, it's like just incredible. I'm actually curious to understand the name. What does Generation 414 mean to you, or what does it stand for?
So Generation 414 is about raising up a generation that will not keep quiet about the injustices of the world. And it was really inspired by a historical story of Queen Esther. So Queen Esther is a beautiful Jewish wife of a Persian king, Xerxes. And I can't remember how many BC that was ago, but It was an
A long
actual
time.
a long time ago. Yes. And so Xerxes had a chief minister called Haman, and he hated the Jews, and he plotted a massacre against them. And so he had the king order an annihilation of the Jews throughout the empire of Persia back then. And so Queen Esther's cousin Mordecai requested for Queen Esther to go and intercede on behalf of the Jewish community in Persia and persuade her king to, retract the royal edict authorizing the massacre of the Jews. And Queen Esther was afraid. Her husband and king did not know that she was of a Jewish descent because she actually had a different name, and then she changed it to a Persian name, Esther, so that people didn't know that she was actually a Jewish girl. And so she was afraid that if she went to see the king without being requested, and then was found that she was actually of Jewish heritage, that she would lose her life. And so Mordecai challenged Esther and said, in the book, in the story, he said, if you keep quiet, the people will perish. Perhaps, Esther, you were born, to be queen and born for such a time like this to save your people. And so long story short, Esther gathered up her courage and went before her king to intercede for her people. And because of her bravery, the lives of the Jewish people were spared. So we are the children of this world. We are one big, community and one big ecosystem. So injustice is done against our men, our women, and our children. And we cannot keep quiet about it. So Generation 414 for me is really raising up a generation that will not keep quiet about the injustice of the world. And like you were saying earlier, we was talking, it's like my life, and I'm helping my nephews, my nieces, my cousins, and hoping that they will help the next generation. What we do today has an impact on future generations and the decisions we make today. And there's a lot of talk about climate change and that beautiful, I can't remember her name.
Greta?
Yes. The next generation, the decisions we make, the industrialization and the burning of coal and the global warming that we are experiencing today has an impact on the next generation, and we must do something about it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, it's impacting us already. All of these things are impacting us already. But when I look at my children and know that they might choose to have children of their own, and the impacts of what that will continue to do if we don't make change in all of the different ways that we know we can actually do better. Wow, what a wonderful story, and what a beautiful choice of, I genuinely, sometimes I will put a question to my guests and I know the answer because I've researched it or whatever. I genuinely didn't know the answer to that question. I hadn't heard you share that story before, and wow, that was absolutely incredible. I'm actually going to do a bit of research myself and pop that story. I'll see what I can find and pop it in the show notes if anyone wants to just learn a little bit more about.
It's a beautiful story. And if you go to YouTube and Google One Night with the King, there is actually a beautiful movie on the story of Esther.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to find that so our listeners can see that. And I think it's actually even something I might want to share with my children, because that message is really powerful. Now, we've obviously already, due to hearing more about your background and even what you've shared with us already about that time in that trip for you to Thailand, human trafficking and sexual abuse and sexual exploitation these are not easy topics to talk about. I'm actually reflecting even internally. The first episode of this season was with the founder of Brave Hearts, who are an organisation that's support young people that have experienced childhood sexual abuse. I find it really interesting that you and I have just by chance had to reschedule this episode time and time again, which has meant that the last episode of this season is also on the topic of sexual abuse. That isn't lost on me. I'm very conscious that the universe has made that the way that it is. But I think that there is still a real misunderstanding around sexual exploitation, but more around human trafficking. So what do you think are the main things that people misunderstand on this topic?
There is sexual abuse, and that happens not necessarily in the trafficking space. So I'm a survivor of abuse myself. And I think that's something that parents and family members need to have very honest conversations with their children about, or, to educate them about good touch, bad touch, educate them that they are a safe person, or parents are. It's ironic too, because sometimes the abuser is also the parent.
Yeah, exactly.
But to really educate children, be it in a home environment or in a school environment, to educate children on what good touch is and what bad touch is, and where to speak up or where to seek help from should something happen, or should something they feel uncomfortable about. They do not have to bear that burden and keep it to themselves, because very often the abuser will say, don't say or you'll get into trouble.
Yeah.
So that there is a very important education piece that needs to be instilled within our kids for them to have courage to speak up. I think that's really, really important. So that's, child sexual abuse, not within the trafficking space. But then within the trafficking space, and it's really sad over the years, because of STD, because of AIDS, sex tourists or exploiters would go, I want to be safe, and therefore I want freshly picked flowers, which is a euphemism for virgins. And so there is just that many 18-year-old virgins before they get all exploited, and then the age gets younger and younger. So now the average age of a traffic victim is sadly only 12. And if you go to Southeast Asia, predominantly Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, they're much younger than that. And the worst story I heard during a justice conference I attended was that people with money would actually pay to custom IVF a toddler or a child, an infant, for the sole purpose of sexual torture. So they know that it is untouched, completely untouched, because very often children, there are surgeries nowadays that they can kind of re-virginize the child.
Wow.
And so people are like, I want to play it safe. I've got money. I will just, a bit like the _Handmaid's Tale, I will pay for a surrogate mom, and I will pay for the IVF, and I will have an infant for my sole purpose of torture. And that is completely unacceptable.
Well, I'm I'm almost running out of words. I'm trying to compose myself. It bends my brain there's so many things that I'm struggling to process there, in the sense of obviously the age, and I understand, though, from what you've shared with me, I can understand what the theory is around seeking younger and younger and younger, and the reasoning behind that, not the justification, but the reasoning. But to go to the extent, or to have the privilege and the power, and to use that privilege and power and abuse it in a way that means that there's a child brought into the world and the sole purpose of that child is to be abused and taken advantage of, that's a step so far outside of what even I understand in the human trafficking space. And I'm sure you have many more examples like that are just, as I've said, I've used the word bubble so many times already. It's so far outside of the bubble of my brain that I'm like, wow, how is this even happening? And I guess from a how is this happening question are we, in the research that you're doing and the work that you're doing, are you identifying that this is prevalent right across the world, or are we seeing, like you've mentioned Southeast Asian countries, But we live in this beautiful place called Australia. I don't anticipate that we are immune from this issue.
No, we're not. So a big driver for being exposed or being more vulnerable to human trafficking is poverty. So we're very privileged in Australia. Yes, we do have homeless and we have poverty over here, but compared to, continents like Africa or in Eastern Europe or in Southeast Asia, our poor is way better off than the poor in the other places that I've named. And we've got a not perfect, but we have a welfare system and people are able to go on Centrelink and get support. In those countries, if you have no means of earning an income, you're pretty much dead.
Yeah.
But yes, trafficking in Australia looks a little bit different from trafficking per se in Southeast Asia, which is the bulk of my experience. Over here, there's a lot more labor trafficking.
Yeah.
Compared to sex trafficking. So our Aussie girls don't per se get trafficked for sexual exploitation, but we do have girls from other countries that get trafficked into Australia to service Australians per se.
Yeah. And you're saying more in the sense of labor, but obviously not excluding other means and other reasonings for the trafficking.
Yeah. So with the Australian AFP, so Australian Federal Police, they are big on forced marriages. Yes. So forced marriages, it's quite a big issue that they are able to address. So a lot of underage, I think in Australia, the legal age for marriage is 18.
From my understanding,
And if you want to get married under 18, you need to have a guardian consent or a signed off, things like that. But there are cases where children, 11, 12, are being forced into marriages with people that are more than twice their age. And in the Australia context, this is not legal, nor is it acceptable. So the Australian Federal Police are able to build a case against it and prevent that from happening to our children. The other thing is that we've got a lot of farms. And so, people would come in on a working holiday visa. And when you're here for a year on the working holiday visa, part of the requirements is, I think, for you to do a bit of farm work. And even though the system and the policies are set in place and that you do that, very often they lived in poor living conditions and they may not be paid the right wages. So there is the exploitation of labor. Or it's also known in restaurants, in the F&B industry, where people would work really long hours and sleep in the kitchen and may not get paid. Or what's very commonly known over here is that we've got all the nail spas or massage parlors. And so, how do the girls come in? What kind of conditions were they brought in? And with the massage parlors, whether they're forced to provide happy endings. Yeah. So with Project Respect, when we did a mapping exercise with Victorian Police a couple of years ago, that was pre-COVID times, I think there were about maybe 70 registered brothels in Australia, in Victoria. I can't remember the numbers, but when they mapped it based on the calls to the police and police going to investigate, it was 10 times more unregistered brothels, massage parlors and whatnots, moonlighting as illegal brothels. So when you are out in your suburb and you see a massage parlor still opened at 11 o'clock at night, ask the question why.
And then there's the further question of if those young women are there by choice, which is the next part of that conversation.
Yep.
You mentioned some of those organisations and departments here in Australia. What are you working on at the moment here in Australia? Are you working on any particular projects, or is there anything that you can share with us about what's happening here in our country?
Well, pre-COVID, we did manage, with the support of Daryl Hinch, we managed to get the confiscation of passports on people on the sex offender list. That bill passed through, which was great because really many on the sex offender list do fly into Asia to engage in child sex tourism. And because, it is so cheap to get onto a Jetstar flight.
Oh, definitely. A couple of $100 and you're out of the country. Pre-COVID, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. So to be able to push that across and get it passed as a bill was a tremendous win for us. So that kinds of reduces the exploitation of children overseas, but that still doesn't mean that our children locally in Australia are kept safe. So I think,
if they're staying here in Australia, then it causes you literally just move a problem from one place to another.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It wasn't solving the problem. It was just moving the problem overseas back home, really.
Yes, unfortunately.
The irony of it.
Yeah,
but
that's the reality of the situation. Yeah, very much so.
So that was that. And then the other thing was, sorry, you were going to say something?
No, you go. Finish what you were saying.
And then in I think it was pre-COVID. No, everything pre-COVID, it's now just a blur.
Everything is pre-COVID. I do have a question for you around COVID, but finish what you're saying first.
Yeah, I can't remember whether it was 2017 or 2018 that we finally got the bilateral support of both parties to sign off on the Modern Slavery Act. So I remember going up to Canberra, and I can't even remember what year it is now, but going up to Canberra and really celebrating that, we've managed to pass through the Modern Slavery Act in Parliament in Australia. So at least we've got a framework for prosecution and to keep people accountable.
Yeah, wow. Now, we've mentioned the word COVID a few times because we're currently in a lockdown and we're still living in this world, and COVID's not going anywhere anytime soon. Have you noticed how has COVID impacted this particular space? Has it created more concerns, or because the world is a little bit more closed, does that mean that this trafficking is not as prevalent because people can't move around as much? I guess it's hard to say. You're based in Australia as well, so I assume you haven't left the country of late. But how, from what you can see, are you noticing any key differences since COVID-19 has happened to the world?
So it's because of the environment that we are in, like you said, people are not traveling as much. So, sex tourism isn't engaged in as much. But what has happened is that they have moved it online. So our children are spending a lot more time online, and perpetrators or syndicates then go online to try and engage or connect with children. And so we've moved, how we used to do face-to-face meetings, and now we're on, a Zoom platform. So it's the same. So rather than physically perpetrating or abusing a young person, they're doing it online. So there has been a tremendous spike. Research have showed a tremendous spike in the dark web, activities in the dark web. Pornography has increased significantly. Online perpetrators and children, reports of children being approached or being abused online. It's been significant. And the other thing is that with COVID and people losing their jobs, many have had to resort in prostitution in order to try and earn an income. So they may not have, service clients that are overseas, but there'll always be a local demand.
Yeah.
So unlike us, where we are in a complete lockdown and there's only 5 reasons to go out of your house, some other countries have, doesn't have such strict restrictions, and so people are still able to engage in prostitution and sexual activities.
Yeah. And I have spent some time in Southeast Asia, and I know that tourism, I know that certain income streams are what they live on, and I know that none of those things are happening right now. So what is happening in those countries that they can't do the work, like the hotels and people that just can't do the work that they normally do? Yeah, it's a really valid point. So for our listeners who get the joy of listening to me talk to people about their dog walking companies or their fitness, like coaching, or, as I said, we have interviewed some people that, in very different spaces. So it's not always, there's very much light and shade. But I'm sure there's people that are listening to this episode that are probably have their eyes pretty wide right now, that are processing some information that they may not have heard before, or may, as I said, chosen to ignore. We've put it right in their ears, and they may be thinking, how can I do more? So what can people do to support Generation 414 or any of the other organizations that that you're aware of that are doing great work in this space?
Yeah, so the model for Generation 414 is really simple. So we import products handmade by the survivors, and we sell them on our online platform, www.generation414.com. Really easy to
That will be
remember.
in our show notes. Don't worry, you don't need to remember that. Just click on the link in the show notes.
Yeah, so really the model's simple. The products are made by the survivors. We work on an empowerment model. The more products we sell, the more ladies we're able to employ, and the more income we're able to provide for them. And the more families will be able to keep out of poverty. So, jump online, buy the products. They make great, meaningful presents. Like I always carry my bag or wear my jewelry, and when I go out, they go, oh, such a beautiful necklace, where did you get it? And I get to tell the story of the journey of a girl when she was on the streets and she got approached by an outreach worker and said, there is an alternative option for you, there is a better life, would you be interested? And she'll go, but I have no skills. I don't know anything. I have nothing to offer. And they go, it's okay. We will teach you. And then, they leave the streets, and she goes into so we don't like take them off the street and put them to work immediately, because that's terrible.
Yeah. It's not like, don't work on the street, come and work in a sweatshop. That's not what this is, just for clarification.
Yes.
It's a little bit more supportive.
Yes. So we actually have caseworkers that would actually sit down and understand, so not just the girl, but the family context on what has driven her onto the streets and what support she needs, so that it is a sustainable plan for her. And so, she goes through therapy, she goes for counseling, and then we ask her, what does she like? We give her numeracy and literacy skills. And not all people like to make jewelry. Some girls like, to hair and makeup. And we also have a center that we partner on the ground that provides a bit like a taste. So the girls can learn the skills. And so it's with the necklace, I go, there was a story that the ops manager on the ground told me. The girls would normally, when they come, they'll go for the therapy, and then they'll just do what they're told. Their heads are down, they're just doing, and they don't really talk to each other because there's just so much weight that they had to carry from the past.
Yes.
But as they continue through the therapy and realize that they have value, they have purpose, they have worth, that they are not their past, and that they have a bright future ahead of them, you see the darkness gets lifted off them, and that this joy is replaced. The darkness is replaced by joy, and you can see sometimes they will do something, and if it's a really cool design, they will do selfies with their jewelry or what they've made. And it's a tremendous journey for someone to be able to be from the streets with no hope to, I've got a skill set, I've got basic business skills, I've got literacy, I've got numeracy, and I've got a trade. And very often, many of them are not based in Bangkok. They come from rural regions of, rural Thailand or rural Cambodia, and they can go back to their community and start a small business and empower other women within their village. And that is the empowerment model that we talk about, that one can help 5 and 5 can then help 25. It's micro business. And it is so important to get these people in rural, poverty-stricken communities out of that cycle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, for our listeners, you not only have a better understanding of what Generation 414 do, but now you can very easily support them. And as I said, all of the details of the organisations and bits and pieces that we can share with you will be in our show notes. So you can connect with Christine and the team and the work that they're doing and purchase a beautiful item that has such purpose and such heart and hope behind the jewelry or the bag or whatever you choose to buy. So I personally know the answer to this question, but I'm really curious to see if what you choose to share with us. What is on the horizon for you at the moment? You've recently launched a project that I'm hoping you will tell our listeners all about, but what projects or what have you been working on and what's happening for you in the near future?
Well, the listeners in Victoria would know that the final report and the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system was tabled in March. So this is really a once-in-a-generation opportunity to design a mental health system which meets the needs of people with mental ill health, their carers, their families, and the workforce that supports them. So I work within the mental health division in the Department of Health. The recommendations are very ambitious. Very, very ambitious, but we need.
I'm glad you're honest about that. You're like, they're really ambitious. I'm like, okay, good. Because sometimes these documents and recommendations, I'm like, really? Did I think? But I'm glad to hear that you've got a realistic approach.
It's quite funny because I also hold the each person's mental health portfolio, and we also had the federal aged care commissioned. And so I had 12.5 kilos of aged care commission report delivered to my house, plus 14.5 kilograms of the report. So I've got close to 30 over kilograms of reports sitting on my library. Wow. And so it is ambitious, but there is this very famous saying that if you shoot for the moon and you miss, at least you'll be among the stars. We have to set our bar high.
Yeah.
Because if we don't set the bar high and we just go for good enough and we fall short of good enough, then it is never going to be enough.
True.
So I'd rather be So I'd rather be a bit more ambitious, and if we, don't meet the mark, at least we're going to push for really a better mental health support for people, especially with COVID and what people are going through. I feel it sometimes too, so I cannot imagine what the others are experiencing. So I'm going to try my best to operationalize the recommendations to improve the system. And I really look forward to a future where all Victorians can experience the best possible mental health and well-being. So that's my day job.
I was going to say that's your day job because you did something really cool recently. So please tell us or the listeners, because I would really love them to know what you have recently launched or released.
Yep. So I recently wrote a chapter in Reasons to Live, One More Day Every Day, volume 3. So it is the third and last volume of the series. And it is a book filled with inspiring, courageous stories of people that have found joy and purpose after adversity. So as the founder of Generation 414 and people that have listened to the podcast for the past 52 minutes are familiar with my passion of ending human trafficking, yet very few people know about my journey with my childhood abuse and trauma. So in this book chapter, I have allowed myself to be really vulnerable and shared the story of my past. And I really hope that sharing of story would let the reader and other people that are reading it that are experiencing similar things or have gone through similar things that have not processed them, to really acknowledge that injustice have been done against them, but they don't have to bear that burden of that injustice, that they can let it go, that they can take controls of their lives and live free from that trauma. And I really hope that my book chapter would really inspire, everyday people and victims of trauma to seek help if they haven't already done so, to take that first step of faith towards recovery and into the light. And I've got that living experience. I am a living testimony of once you process through that, there's so much in life, so much that life can offer you and so much more that you can achieve. So it is a must-read book for anyone that's searching for hope, purpose, and reasons to live one more day every day. So if you struggle with mental health issues yourself or you're supporting a loved one who does, I encourage you to grab a book or a few of the books and give it to people that you know. You just never know who is waiting for a message of hope from one of these stories. Yep.
Oh, that's incredible. I've shared on previous episodes, I'm also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Your story resonates really with me, and as I said, it is not lost on me that by chance the first episode of season 2 was with someone that's working in this space, and that by chance I'm sitting with another survivor and having another discussion. It's very timely for me, and that message of hope, as we know, we never really know who needs to hear or read the message, but I know, and you know firsthand, that the moment you share your story, someone is going to take that, and it's likely going to be the thing that they need to hear to get them through one more day. So that sounds incredible. We will definitely put all of the details of the book also in our show notes so you can get a copy. You got a lot of things to buy, people. You got to go buy some jewelry and a bag and a book. Just gift them, keep them, buy multiple copies, whatever you want to do. But get your credit card out. It's like that, just enjoy your lockdown, buy some things. It's all going to a good place.
It's called retail therapy. Very good for you.
It's retail therapy, but like really good retail therapy, like the stuff that changes the world kind of stuff. Yes. Now, my last question, and it's always a tricky one because there's so many people, but who inspires you and why?
Lots of people inspire me. The world, as horrid as we've talked about, how the world has throughout history has been made out of a lot of beautiful people. Like Esther. Esther was how many thousand years ago, but her story still resonates today about courage, about bravery, about, speaking up for injustice. It's timeless. But who inspires me a lot is Mother Teresa. Throughout her life, Mother Teresa devoted herself to helping the poor. And the thing about Mother Teresa is she is quite small in stature, and I'm really petite. I come in cute size.
You're cute size. It's not small, it's not petite, it's cute. I love that.
I am cute size.
Like Mother Teresa.
Yeah, and so I could I'm about her size. Even though her stature is small, but her heart for humanity was just so huge. And I really it's like I tell myself, when I grow up, I want to be just like her kind of thing, And so she shared some really powerful words during her lifetime that really resonated with me. She said, if you can't feed 100 people, then just feed one. Human trafficking is a huge problem, and with an estimated 46 million trapped in the various forms of human trafficking today, we can't save them all. I can't save them all, and we can't change the world. But if we commit to just helping one life at a time, we would have changed the world for the person that we helped. And she also said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters and create many ripples. And that's the mission of Generation 414. I can't speak up for all the injustice of the world, but I can try and raise up a generation of people who will. And that's what 𝗦𝗵𝗲 University does to me pretty much every year. So the first semester social work students that they have, they always bring me in to guest lecture to kind of inspire the kids. And I would always tell them, you didn't sign up for social work to be rich or to be famous. If that's what you want to do, you're in the wrong course.
You're in the wrong room.
You're in the wrong room, and the door
in
is
marketing and television and media room because you're in the wrong room.
Yeah, you're in the wrong room, and the door is that way. So I say that, and I go, look, I am passionate about human trafficking, but you're in social work because there was something in you or something you've experienced that upset you enough to want to push for change. So why are you here? Some people are passionate about animals. Some people love nature. Some people are passionate about perhaps mental health, like what I'm doing right now. So whatever your cause in, go and do something about it. And always remember your why, because there are days where it gets so hard and you just want to give up. But if you always come back to your why, that will give you the drive to take one step in front of the other. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're not here to do the 100-meter dash. We're here to do a marathon, and sometimes even an ultra marathon. You may not think that you'll ever reach the finishing line, but if you just commit to putting one feet in front of another every day, you will eventually get there. And just think about the number of lives or the impact you would have made along that journey. It's not the destination, it is the journey. And then lastly, she said, we all, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And I absolutely love that, because here I am, a little cute-sized Asian woman in a suburb in Melbourne, recording a podcast. In the scheme of things, might be small compared to Emma Watson speaking in UN, in front of crowd, being live telecast. But everything I do, I put my 100% love and effort into it to try and achieve the best outcome for the people I'm trying to help. And as long as whatever you're doing it with love, that's good enough.
I think that's a really good thing to end on.
I think
so. Christine, thank you for being a guest today on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your insights, knowledge, and personal stories, and being here, being vulnerable, doing your piece and your part in the world that we're in, because I know that the work that you're doing is well and truly changing lives, and to know that you're doing it with such love is absolutely beautiful. To our listeners, this has been a tricky one to listen to, I know that, but I commend you for sticking with us, for listening to the light and shade as we've giggled about cute-sized humans, and we have also dived into some realities that are hard to hear. Thank you for joining us again on another episode of She Inspires Me. We will speak to you on the next episode, which will be the first episode of season 3. But until then, have a fantastic day, and thank you for being an incredible human Go do something filled with love, and we will speak to you again soon. Thank you for joining us today and for being a part of this incredible community. Remember to hit subscribe, to share this episode with your friends and family, and to join us in our next episode to be inspired by more exceptional women.